Okay, take two. Welcome to Critical Weight Theory. And today I'm talking about wolves once more. Not the ones in the woods, but the ones who walk around looking like everyone else. The ones who smile, might speak softly, and say gentle, polite things while hiding their darker thoughts and instincts behind their warmer mask. And no, I'm not just talking about people like Ted Bundy this time. I've done some episodes where I talked about that, and I'm going to touch upon that a little bit here, but I'm also talking about ordinary people who might not be outright maniacs, but who still have dark thoughts sometimes. And who knows, maybe if life goes wrong for them, maybe they could act out those thoughts. Who knows? All it takes is just a little bit of a push sometimes, maybe some brain chemistry is altered. You never really know. They might get hit on the head and it scrambles their circuits and they become maniacs or something. So, as I've touched upon in the other episodes, folklore has been warning us about this idea for centuries. In Little Red Riding Hood, the wolf does not win through force, he wins through disguise. He slips into the grandmother's clothing, pulls the blankets up to his chin, and just waits. He uses the comfort of a familiar voice and a familiar setting to pull the girl closer. And we know how it ends. And yes, the same pattern plays out in true crime stories, oddly enough. Maybe not literally, dressing up as the grandmother, but Ted Bundy is the clear example that I've used plenty of times. He often faked injuries or pretended to be an authority figure to gain people's trust. A sling, a cast, maybe a fake badge so he would look like a police officer. Small props that let him cross the distance between stranger and friend. And like the wolf, he understood that most people hesitate to challenge what looks safe. His victims' instincts were not weak, they were just disarmed. And in some ways, you can't really expect people to behave any differently because they were just acting normally. But again, this is not the only dimension to this topic, even if it's the most obvious one. The core question here, after putting the most dramatic and freaky examples aside, is pretty simple. Why do people create false personas in the first place? What makes someone feel the need to pretend? A lot of it comes down to insecurity and unmet needs. Some people want approval so badly that they'll change how they present themselves just to fit in. Others fear rejection, convinced that their real personality just will not be enough. Some want attention or status, so they feel like they have to put on an act, and in some cases, maybe they do. And I know that if you're entering the corporate world, you will sometimes have to engage in some crooked activities, or, of course, the world of politics, or just other avenues of life where you're kind of expected to walk down a darker path just in order to make ends meet. Maybe you're engaging in the black market of some kind, and it doesn't always have to be like Breaking Bad or anything like that, but we've all known some examples of people who maybe they started off relatively innocent or benign, but something led them astray, and quite often they put up a false front or they're compartmentalizing their lives so they will lead a relatively normal life on the surface, but just beneath the surface there's something darker going on. It's sort of like the image of a holier than thou religious person, maybe a religious fanatic who's abusive at home or into some kinky stuff, or of course, they might be deeply closeted, hiding their real sexuality, or any number of things like that. Society does in manifold ways encourage people to put up a false front, maybe even entirely fake personalities or personas. And some do not know who they are, so they borrow traits from everyone around them. I myself was a little bit more of a social chameleon when I was in high school. I've talked about that a little bit. So, for example, I was peer pressured into smoking, which I did for about a half a year, maybe even a full year when I was younger in my high school days. And the reason I quit smoking is that I actually stole uh, at least a cigarette or two from my mom's purse. I don't remember exactly how much it was, but yeah, I was a little bit of a bratty thief back when I was younger, you know. So I've been there, you know. I had a dark side. I still do have a dark side, but I've never let it get too dark, I suppose, to the point where I'm in trouble with the law or anything like that. And you know, many people out there are simply trying to keep the peace. A fake smile can be a shield, not a weapon. So it's not just that a person has some nefarious intentions. You will smile at work even if you hate your job, as sort of an obvious example. So usually there's some dark element to it, but it's not always as purely evil as like a serial killer or something like that. Of course, not, you know, not every false persona is malicious, but some of them are actually somewhere in between. You know, there's a good person thrown into the mix of something that's bad. You know, that does happen too. But most personas that we adopt are protective, but the mind still treats the unknown as a threat. When information is missing, we fill the gaps with fear. We guess and we often guess wrong, so that's why we're nervous. And we if we have a crude life experience, not a crude but a crude, like gathered up life experiences, we understand that, you know, there's going to be some potential danger out there. And it can be tricky to not be afraid, to not fear what's lurking around every single corner, because there's always that one example that you hear about of somebody who just got wiped out because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, or any number of things can happen, you know. So think about this pattern. If someone has been hurt before, even a neutral comment can feel like an attack. The brain scans for danger because danger once existed. A simple text like, "Hey, we should talk soon," could set off alarms that were wired years ago. Tone gets misread, short messages sound cold, direct answers sound harsh. We hear things that were never said. And Key and Peele actually have a great sketch about this very topic. You know, he's sending well, the two are sending texts to each other, and they're just totally misread, and the situation just keeps on escalating and escalating to some comedic and potentially violent ends to the sketch. So I don't want to spoil too much, but I guess I kind of did already. Whoopsie. But anyway, stress only makes this worse. When someone is overwhelmed, their threat radar becomes oversensitive, the world shrinks into a tunnel, and everything in that tunnel looks sharper than it really is. You know, it looks more dangerous, even things that probably are ultimately benign. If we're feeling paranoid, we're probably going to be more likely to just stay inside. Of course, one of the problems with that is, are you really safe inside either? Because some scary person could always break in and turn your world upside down. So even your own home is actually a bit of an illusion of safety. And that's really that's really a bit of a scary realization, but also an excuse for you to actually get out and see the world a little bit more often. Because if you're not truly safe anywhere, then why not sometimes take a chance anyway, you know? And sometimes assuming someone meant harm gives a strange sense of control. That's another reason we do that. It feels better than accepting that life is messy and full of misunderstandings. In addition to the actual real dangers out there, some of the interactions with people that we think are potentially dangerous or even just frustrating, some of those interactions, who knows if we had let them happen, maybe our lives could have actually been better, even. I know it's a little bit of a thought experiment, and you could go crazy thinking about all of the would have, could have, and should have scenarios, but nonetheless, it's some food for thought, right? What if I hadn't been afraid to talk to so and so? Like, could that have been the love of my life? Maybe. Now, I'm sure some of you out there are happily married and you're doing just fine, but even then, it could still be some food for thought. I don't want to mess up your marriage, but by talking about that, but who knows? There's always that one thing that you could have said or done differently that maybe could have changed your whole life, maybe your whole outlook, any number of things. Maybe you could have accidentally been hoodwinked into joining a cult or something like that. Then again, maybe some of you out there are actually in cults. I don't know. And continuing back onto the topic here, the main topic, there is also negativity bias. The human brain is built to pay more attention to danger than safety. It kept ancestors alive, but it can twist modern interactions into perceived threats. And all of this makes the wolf story hit a little bit harder, doesn't it? It's not just a fairy tale about a monster in a costume, it's a lesson on how trust works, how deception works, and how easily the familiar can be turned against us. So we actually, in some ways, have to fight against this narrative, this tale as well, because it can't be an all encompassing thing. We can't be afraid of everything. We can't. We can't even know about every threat that's out there because if you spend all the time assessing every possible danger, well, then you're not going to even be leading much of a life, are you? So, in the story, the grandmother's cottage should be a place of comfort. Instead, it becomes the stage for betrayal. And yes, going back to the sort of standard example of Ted Bundy that I use, he did the same thing in real life. He turned routine spaces into hunting grounds, college campuses, parking lots, homes. He used the ordinary to mask the extraordinary danger that he carried with him. So both predators, the fictional and the real, relied on psychology more than force. They waited for people to overlook the tiny details. They used charm and confidence to make others doubt their own instincts. They created a moment of hesitation, and in that moment, everything changed. So the lesson here is not to fear every smile or every stranger. It's to understand how trust works. Trust is a powerful thing, and so is the desire to be seen, accepted, and safe. Those needs can blind us, but they can also guide us. When we understand why people hide behind personas and why our minds sometimes overreact to danger, we get better at protecting ourselves without shutting down and just becoming the proverbial hermits in the hills or whatever. I guess in some ways, maybe the hermit in the hills doesn't have it so bad all the time either. So it's really a cost benefit analysis at the end of the day. Anyway, the wolf is not always outside the door. Sometimes the danger is our instinct to smooth the story, calm the doubt, and assume everything is fine, too. So I guess maybe this episode is just encouraging you to look at all of the nuances to this crazy world that we live in. And that is why these tales stay with us. They remind us to listen closely, look carefully, and trust these small signals that our minds try to send.